So I get asked all the time, how do you spot this stuff in early dating? The answer is simple: by setting boundaries. How someone responds to your boundaries is reflective of their intentions and their emotional maturity. Now, I have a personal example that I'm going to share. It's literally 10 text messages back and forth that'll highlight all of this. I'm going to give you my key takeaways and then share what ChatGPT had to say about it. Because honestly, when we've been groomed to tolerate absolute shit from dating culture, having AI validate the subtle gaslighting is going to be eye-opening for a lot of you. And to the guy who this video is about, please know that there's no shade. This is for educational purposes only. We can't change what we don't acknowledge. It's going to be a long one, so buckle up. So let me preface this by saying that I don't actively date. I live in a small town, and I don't think that there's a lot of people around here that have unpacked trauma and social conditioning the way that I have. I literally say that I live in a different version of reality than most people that I know. And that doesn't make me better. It just makes me more conscious. And it's difficult to connect with people who don't share that same level of awareness. Now, about a week and a half ago, a fellow parent at drop-off asked me for a coffee. We had exchanged a few friendly chats here and there, and so I thought, why not? I gave him my number and we texted over the next week. Now, I'm the type of person who prefers to get to know somebody in real life, not through endless texting. I'm not interested in a texting buddy, and honestly, love bombers love the endless texting. So I prefer to not create a fantasy of who somebody is. I would rather get to know them in person. So one day he reached out to me to check how my day was going. We exchanged a few messages, and as I was responding to one, he sent me something completely out of left field. I'll let you guys read it, but it came out earlier that week about what I do on here. If he looked at my content, he would know that a comment like this was completely off base. So obviously I responded with a less than enthusiastic reply, and his response was, hopefully that made you laugh. I'm testing your sense of humor. Here's the first key point. If I don't find that funny, what does that mean? I'm too serious, or I'm a prude, or it's too much to ask for respectful communication before we've even gone on a first coffee date. But just think about what that communicates. It's a setup for you're too sensitive or you can't take a joke. So I responded that respect is a value of mine. And instead of acknowledging the disrespect in his initial comment, he doubled down that his need for humor was more important than my values. This shows entitlement. So at this point, I decided to clearly lay out my boundary. I do not engage in sexual banter with people that I'm not even dating. When you've done the work to unpack toxic dating culture and toxic masculinity, you realize that when a man leads with sex, it often signals that they don't have much else to offer. Now, I also understand that men too are groomed into this dating culture and to objectify women. So he may not have unpacked all of the ways objectification can show up, and this being one. So I was willing to give him grace. But this is point 2. Grace only works when someone can take accountability for crossing a boundary. Now, I didn't expect him to know that this was a boundary. That is why I communicated it clearly. But instead of acknowledging it, he deflected. He doesn't need the coffee date. He was just interested in conversation. So in other words, asking me for coffee is just the motions you go through. He was most interested in validation and seeing if I would engage in sexual conversations over text. So obviously I held him accountable, and I have been on red since. So I fed the exchange through ChatGPT. The initial message begins with a boundary crossing statement. This is an assumption he is making about my intentions. He then escalates by making a crude comment about her using him to create content and turning it into accusations of being an abuser. This sets the tone that he is already framing her in a negative light without any actual indication of her behavior. The remark is disrespectful and sets up a power imbalance where he's assigning a narrative to Jackie that isn't true. He then tries to reframe the situation as a joke, testing my sense of humor. This is a deflection tactic where he tries to backpedal on his inappropriate comment. Jackie's reaction makes it clear she doesn't appreciate it or find the joke acceptable, especially when it touches on boundaries she holds around respect. Jackie's response is firm and clarifies that she has specific boundaries around humor. Respecting my fellow human is one, which he dismisses by continuing to push the same kind of humor and responding with, I still need to test your funny bone. He is disregarding her stated boundary in favor of his own desire to continue with this type of joking. This is the entitlement that I'm talking about. His need for humor is more important than my need for respect. When I set a clear boundary, he deflects rather than acknowledging the boundaries, avoiding taking responsibility for the initial inappropriate comment. This can be interpreted as avoiding accountability for crossing my boundary and turning it into a narrative about himself, suggesting that his comments are coming from a place of just needing to change the conversation rather than recognizing the discomfort he caused with his initial comment. Jackie's last comment was a very clear boundary. She reinforces that sexual banter is not appropriate at this stage in their interaction. Her statement emphasizes the disconnect between her expectations for respectful communication and his behavior. And then obviously, because he left me on red, it's a lack of accountability for his actions. This exchange highlights several red flags about his behavior. Disrespect of boundaries. He makes assumptions about Jackie's intentions and crosses boundaries with inappropriate humor. When confronted, he deflects and tries to justify his actions rather than taking responsibility. And instead of having a genuine conversation or apologizing, he disengages, showing a lack of emotional maturity and respect for my needs. Jackie's responses are clear and mature and boundary conscious. She is showing emotional intelligence by stating her boundaries explicitly and holding space for respectful communication. However, his failure to acknowledge the boundaries and his avoidance behavior suggests that he might not be emotionally mature enough for a healthy connection. This simple interaction is a giant walking red flag, and it's something you need to pay attention to in early dating. How do they respond to your boundaries? If they push or disregard your boundaries, that is abusive behavior. They do not value your autonomy. If they deflect, they are likely avoiding shame or responsibility. And a person who is genuine will acknowledge the boundary, even if they didn't intend to cross it, and they will offer an apology. If someone deflects or refuses to take accountability, that is the fourth pillar of abuse. Lack of accountability. It shows a lack of respect for your boundaries and your emotional safety. Let me know if all of that was clear.